Okay, here we go. Another episode of the Linsider. This is episode 3, and today I will be speaking with a friend that I've known for a very long time. It is Jamie Lai, and I'm happy to have her. She'll be on here soon. Let's see here. Her brief bio. So Jamie Lai is a media executive with 20 years experience in Hollywood and Asia. She currently heads the LA office for the Korea-based entertainment studio Bound Entertainment. Jamie produced Bounty Hunters starring Lee Min-ho and Tiffany Tang, and shepherded and packaged the Chinese remake of the Korean drama She Was Pretty, starring Diri Urba. She was previously a producer at Wanda and oversaw the location-based entertainment movie park in Wuhan, China. I'm really excited to have Jamie here soon, and we will be talking momentarily. Hope you guys are all doing well. As you listen, please tell your friends about this podcast. Please give me a rating on Apple Podcast. If you use Apple Podcast, give a rating and review. That really helps a lot in the discovery. Hope you're enjoying this. And if you have any questions or comments on the podcast, for any of my guests, for me, please reach out. Email is thelinsidershow@gmail.com or through any of the social media channels. I have them all linked through Simplecast, but on most of the social media channels, the handle is just the Linsider or the Linsider Show. I am drinking here some delicious oolong tea. That will be something I will discuss in some later episodes. I have a love and a passion for tea.
Hi.
Hello, Jamie. How are you?
I'm good.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you great.
Cool. How's everything going?
Good. It's been busy. I just looked at your questions like 15 minutes ago.
Oh, no worries. So the way that I've been doing this is that, well, first of all, thanks for getting on. I love having this even as a way for us to catch up because I haven't talked to you in a while. But no worries on the question list because the way I've been doing it is very just more conversationally. And so whatever comes up, we can discuss and we don't have to follow the question list.
Okay. Perfect.
So no need to worry about prepping. And then after this, what I usually do is I take the stream and I download it. I edit the audio and I don't edit the video because I haven't figured that out yet. But and I usually upload the video onto YouTube and then I promote the show on podcasts. But if you want whatever version. I'll send you the edited audio. And then on the video, if you don't want to have that, you can just let me know.
Okay.
So I already read your bio. Thanks for sharing that. I guess, how are you doing? How are things for you?
I'm good. It's been very busy in my world. So
yeah, are you pulling like both US and Asia hours right now?
Yep. So my days are pretty long, and I usually have to work like a half day on Sunday.
Yep.
So.
Oh my gosh, I do not envy that. That is one thing well, there's a lot of things I don't miss about working at Alibaba, but that's one of them. So anyways, welcome to the Linsider. This is episode 3. I'm going to hopefully post this on Monday. I'll get this to you over the weekend. I've already done a brief introduction about you, but I guess to begin with, tell me a little bit about yourself and where you're from. I'm more interested in that, like the Jamie Lai origin story.
I'm currently a media executive for Bound Entertainment. I'm from Sacramento, where I am actually right now during the pandemic, physically in Sacramento. I usually based in LA. I sort of have built a career around being sort of like the bridge between Asia and Hollywood. So I worked in China for 6 years, mostly in a capacity that was either for co-productions or working with international vendors for Asia-based projects. I came back to the US in 2017 and been working with various Asian companies in the media space here. But before then, once upon a time, I was a lawyer. But I did that for like a year. And ever since then, I've been trying to figure out my place in Hollywood.
Cool. And tell me, how did you get your start into the industry? Like, how did you get from Sacramento to LA? It's California, but those of us from California know it's worlds apart.
Yeah, so I think my love affair with movies and TV started when I was in law school. I was a director of an Asian American film festival called Waves in Iowa City. And through that festival, I met producers and directors and storytellers and was sort of enamored and really like inspired that there were people who were working in this space, because I didn't think that it was even a consideration at all growing up. And so when I graduated from law school, I had 2 main passions at that time. And one was the possibility of working in media. And second, China was on my radar. Once I graduated from college, I did an internship also in media in Taiwan.
Oh.
And I sort of naively at the time thought China must be like a bigger version of Taiwan, only to find out they're very different from each other. When I was growing up, we never went back to Taiwan. Like, I barely traveled outside of the United States. I didn't know very much about my own. I didn't really speak the language. I didn't know very much about our history. So Asia for me was like this really big adventure after college. And so I went to China in the summers of my law school career as part of like internships that I would do. And so
like law internships at like law firms.
Legal internships. Yeah. I did a legal internship in Shanghai before I graduated law school. So I had this I was both ready for an adventure in China, but I was also interested in this idea that maybe I could do something in entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
So I had actually was thinking about like, I know I just spent 3 years in law school, so maybe I'll just move to New York City and read scripts, you know? So I forget the name of this company. There was some sort of Asian American channel or network that was based in New York City that was like hiring people who could translate subtitles or subtitle content that they were licensing from Asia, like very, very early on. And then also a company that was willing to hire me for very, very little amount of money, part-time, to read scripts.
Mm-hmm.
Or I could move to China.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately I got like a really good offer to go work in China. And that just seemed too good to pass up because China was still to me at that time, and it still is actually like this magical place that
Mm-hmm.
where anything could happen. And
Mm-hmm.
so I decided to be a lawyer in China. Not really a lawyer because there's all these rules about whether you can actually be a lawyer with
Mm-hmm.
a bar here, but and then ultimately hated being a lawyer, and then I started my real work in production. I cold emailed a independent production from US that was shooting in Shanghai to hire me as a translator, which I really at the time was not qualified to do. My Chinese was so bad back then.
But you were overqualified in other areas.
I was overqualified in other areas. I ended up coming back to LA sort of with the production. It wasn't like they paid me to come back to Los Angeles, but I sort of knew that if I moved to LA, they would hire me for a period of time to work on that project, to continue to work in that project in post-production. So that's what I did. And so then I was basically been in LA from then until I moved to China in 2011.
Wait, and what part of this was was this? Are you talking about your experience at Iron Pond? Is that the? Because that's where we met, I think.
Yes,
right?
We met when I was working as a development exec for Iron Pond.
Yeah.
But previous to that, I had done like the physical production route. Like I was a PA.
So you did that. That was in Shanghai, and then you came back to LA, and then you joined the Iron Pond.
No. I still was a PA in Hollywood. So, and that's when I realized, I was like, oh, this is how Hollywood makes movies. And it was very different from how Chinese movies are made. So, yeah.
So you had a whole PA experience in Hollywood.
Oh, yeah. I actually think that working on set is like, it's pretty magical, right?
Mm-hmm.
And working on a Hollywood set is even more magical because like they feed you. And
that's the truth. The China set, I understand what you say when you say magical, but I wouldn't describe it as that.
Yeah. Well, but look, I think that when you work on a China set, there's even more a sense of magic to it because the bare bones of what a China set is and what they get on screen is sort of that transfer is kind of amazing.
Oh, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Right?
Whereas in Hollywood, it's such a machine. So you sort of like, you kind of can understand like how this can come to be, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But I feel like there's more of it's hard for anyone to imagine that what it's like behind the scenes on a China set.
Yeah, because it literally looks like a student-run production most of the time.
Yeah, it's just very bare bones. Like there's no such thing as craft services.
Yeah.
You know, like the best, like if you have like Hong Kong crew on your set, like maybe the coolest thing that you would have is like a lady who will pour tea for you. And so you have like this never ending supply of like hot water on set. But besides that.
My favorite is did you ever have anyone set that they would do like the Cantonese soups, the bal tongue?
No, never been on a set that fancy.
No, it's not fancy. It's literally, they got a hot stove like you're camping, but because it's like a Cantonese, like made by like a Cantonese mom. It's so good, and it's just so nice when you're on a movie set, especially if you're doing a movie set like any time in the cold or in the north or in the wintertime.
Yeah. Yeah.
So tell me about that transition, because so you went from Sacramento and then you had this adventure first to Taiwan and then to China. I think we're part of this small group of people that it feels like we're in our own bubble, because I think we each know a lot of people that have had this experience, but I think outside of this bubble of ours, like people have no idea, right? I think most of the Asian or Chinese execs that I meet in Hollywood, sometimes they've not even really traveled much to Asia. So they really don't understand this world, and not only the work differences, but the cultural differences. Can you tell me like a little bit, like when you first started moving over there, and what were some of the biggest surprises and shocks to you?
Well, my experience might be a bit different from maybe your own, because I had worked in China first at a law firm. So
Mm-hmm.
I sort of had like when I first got to China, I had more of a glamorous expat life,
Mm-hmm.
where I had like a nice apartment and
Mm-hmm.
like I remember I had a secretary right away when I got to
Mm-hmm.
China. So I just remember my secretary wanting to go shopping in our lunch hour, and we would go like to Fendi. I just remember this so clearly. She took me to Fendi, and I had never been to like maybe the most expensive store I had been to at that point was like Banana Republic.
Uh-huh.
And I remember going to Fendi, and she's like, "I'm so excited because I'm gonna go to Hong Kong and I get to spend." I forgot, she named some unseemly amount of budget, and I was like, "I have no idea what you're talking about," because our office was right
Wow.
above the Fendi store, and so
Like
that
what,
was
Plaza
my
66?
no, no, not Plaza 66, but the Ritz, the Ritz
Oh, the
Museum,
Ritz. Yeah,
the
it's right
Ritz.
next door to that. Okay.
Yeah, so I was right above the Fendi store in the Ritz
Yeah.
Carlton. And I mean, it never even occurred to me that even with a lawyer salary that I could ever shop at any of these stores. Like that's like maybe like the Chinese American immigrant family value system where it's like, you know,
Save, save, save.
yeah, like my idea of like buying an LV bag was going to, the Shanghai market to get the knockoff. Uh, but but so I definitely, when I first got to China, wasn't living like a media executive production set assistant life, right?
Mm.
But then eventually, when I transitioned into that, it was sort of a hybrid at first, because I think the independent movie that I was working on wasn't fully a local Chinese experience, but it was still very indie by American Hollywood standards, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But talk a little bit about that, like that experience you mentioned of being like a Asian American, and from that, because I think your experience there with the shopping experience, that immediately I think is breaking the stereotype or the image that we would have about China, right? Because like to this day, like I'll go to meetings and people will tell me like China is dirty or it's backward or it's something, right? And that experience you said is probably what in the early is like it was many years ago, and that's the experience that you have. That's the attitude that young Chinese have about disposable income and about their future. I think it says a lot, and it's important that people realize that.
Yeah, when I first got to China, I think it was 2005, so it was sort of still even very early stages before, like there wasn't even the term Tuhao. And I think at the time, like Pudong in Shanghai was still like under construction, so it
Mm-hmm.
was,
Totally.
but
I got there around the same time in 2004.
yeah, so I think, but you could already sense there was an energy that like things were changing in China and anything was
Mm-hmm.
possible, which is
Mm-hmm.
what I feel like it probably was like in Hollywood, probably like what the 80s or the early 90s was like in Hollywood, or maybe at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution in America, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of energy is really exhilarating and addictive, right? So every time I would come back to the States, I would still find myself wondering, like, maybe I should just go back to Asia. It wasn't until
Mm-hmm.
recently where I was like, yeah, I should just stay in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you and I had numerous conversations
Mm-hmm.
after you moved back, and I just couldn't like stop myself from being attracted to the allure of like what was going on in Asia.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
So I think when I first got there, I mean, there were definitely things that you missed about America, but I feel like now there's not that even much to miss, really, at least in terms of your day-to-day life, right? So like when I first got to China, avocados were like $10 each and like impossible to find. And
Yeah, I
then,
wouldn't even dream of buying one because it just
yeah.
doesn't make sense.
And I don't think most Chinese people never eat canned food or canned anything. One of
Especially
my
fruits.
Yeah, like everything was like fresh, and you would go to the wet markets and buy fresh everything. Like, I mean, if it really farm to table was like actual farm to table for everybody
Mm-hmm.
In Asia at the time. And so my favorite story is I had hosted a bunch of people at work at the law firm to come. I was going to make like a hybrid of like Tex-Mex and American style chili.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went to the foreign grocery store and I bought all of like canned beans and all of this stuff. And some of the women at the firm had offered to come and help me prepare the food. And I had like 8 different cans. I was like, oh, could you just start helping me open the cans? Because I couldn't find an electric can opener in China at the time. So I had like one like not so great hand can opener. And I just remember leaving because I was still like setting up like the tables and where the food would be. And I just heard banging in the kitchen. And I was like, what are you guys doing? And I go there and all the cans are dented because they thought that they had to like break open the can to open what was inside the can because they had never eaten canned food. And then I was like, I was embarrassed. They were embarrassed. It wasn't a great start to like having people over, but I just remember this is like a very different life. This is just experience wise, like we're worlds apart, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because in my family growing up in Sacramento, it was like instant everything, takeout everything, fast food everything.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, I remember like cup noodles were like the big thing.
Mm-hmm. I probably
right?
ate like 5 cups of cup of noodles like every week.
Yeah, that was like the after school thing. Like
Mm-hmm.
I did that like because my parents worked, so that was like the after school snack basically with an egg or something.
It's probably like it should be like the symbol of a latchkey kid, right? It's like a cup of noodles brand. Yeah.
That's so funny. That's a great story with the with the cans. I think that's like you should be writing. I hope you have like a diary, like volumes of diaries you've kept.
I have random stories that I've written everywhere. It's like, yeah, but maybe one day. But I still kind of feel like the China adventure is not quite over yet, but we'll see.
Oh, well, I mean, I don't think so. I mean, you might live here now, but I think, for a production or whatnot, you never, that's totally fine, or for a business trip.
Right.
And then, so how did you get, so you said you didn't like law, and then what did you do? Like, well, how did you just kind of decide that you're going to go back to being a PA?
Yeah, I just started over again. So much to my parents' chagrin, I started over at the bottom of the totem pole. I was running coffee.
Oh my gosh.
I was delivering lunch. I was delivering scripts. And this was still in the days where like there wasn't Google Maps. I think it was like MapQuest. And you had to like print out maps to figure out where to go. And I'm a terrible driver. So I had like this beat up car that like, I'm the kind of driver that always like accidentally hits the bumper in the divide, and like, driving. I just remembered like driving into the Hollywood Hills to deliver scripts in these like really fancy houses.
Wow.
As part of like my job, one of my like early jobs in Hollywood production, after being like a glamorous expat lawyer in China. Yeah.
Yeah. How did you get yourself to do that? I think that's interesting to talk about a little bit because I had to do that too. So I'm curious to hear how did you prepare yourself just mentally and I guess financially and just to do it? Did you give it much thought?
Probably not enough thought. I felt like I gave it a little bit of thought. And I often felt like if it wasn't for the fact that I had a scholarship to go to law school and had saved money being a lawyer, even though I didn't even work like a whole year of being a lawyer, I still had savings, right? Because I didn't end up buying a bag at Fendi, right?
Did the secretary?
Yeah, like she would go on these fancy Hong Kong trips and like look at all of the brand name stuff that I bought, and it was fascinating. But yeah, for me, I had savings when I first got to Los Angeles, so I think that was helpful. But I was always like, I've always been kind of a dreamer, so it never occurred to me that like it was like bad. Because when I first got to LA, I was like living in my cousin's living room, and I never thought that even though I had my own like 2-bedroom apartment in Shanghai, it didn't occur to me that like I should be embarrassed by this. I just thought I was on this adventure, and thinking about it now, I'm so naive and so privileged to even like thinking that living on someone's living room floor is like an adventure, but it was an adventure for me. Because it was, I felt like it was the first time I was choosing to do something and like really making that choice for myself, because I think I like law, and I was always like, I was in speech and debate and I did mock trial, but it just felt like it was the easy thing for me to do because those were the options presented to me. Like it was easier for me to think about being a lawyer versus a doctor, but I had never sat there and thought to myself like, well, if I really, really wanted to forge my own path, what would that be? And so it kind of felt like when I got to LA that I was really choosing to forge my own path, which I mean, isn't to say that it wasn't hard. There were moments where I was like, really, what am I doing with my life? Right.
So, it actually would have been easier if you just kind of kept at it, actually, your law career in some sense, probably.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Right.
But at the time,
there's a path, a very defined path.
But at the time, I actually felt like choosing entertainment was the easier like choice for myself.
And then after you made that choice, what was the moment that made you feel comfortable that this was the right choice?
I think it's this job that I have right now, really, just like this year. Yeah. I really enjoy working at Bound Entertainment. I do really think what we're doing here at Bound is really exciting. I think because I think, the festival that I did when I was in law school was an Asian American Film Festival. I had always really wanted to do Asian content, right? And even more so after living in Asia, it felt like even more important that there was this whole world that people didn't understand or see. I felt embarrassed by how little I knew about what was going on in Asia. And even my own hubris when going over there and thinking, oh, of course I know because I'm from America, right? And realizing I know nothing. And I'm not saying that I don't have any personal responsibility in that, but I do think that the viewpoints of so much of the world is really shaped by what American media or Hollywood media puts out there, right? Yeah. And so I think I I ended up in Asia a lot because I really wanted to tell Asian stories, because I didn't really think that people in Hollywood when I was working in LA was interested,
Mm-mm.
right? And then so excited to be back to where I consider America to be my home, to
Mm-hmm.
really finally have an opportunity to tell those stories is
Yeah.
exciting for me.
So I guess, I have so much follow-up for that, because that's a really, I think, profound thing that you said. So I guess first, let's unravel it piece by piece. You mentioned Bound. Talk a little bit about what you guys, like what it is and what you guys are doing.
So Bound Entertainment is a Korean entertainment studio, and I oversee the LA office, and was started by Samuel Ha, who's my boss and CEO. And I feel like he started the company partly because he felt like there was a lot of resources and talent in Asia that he wanted to help find a platform globally,
Mm-hmm.
and that he is an international producer who can speak Korean fluently, who spent really most of his career in Asia, um, and felt like that he could be the one to sort of be that channel, that he had enough experience under his belt to be an asset for talents in Asia to bring them to the rest of the world. And I met Sam because we did a co-production called Bounty Hunters, which was a Chinese language project with like a Korean star and Chinese stars. That was a movie that was released in I want to say like 2014. Um, and and I feel like he's also Korean American, and I feel
Mm-hmm.
like I think we connected partly because we both felt like we ended up in Asia for similar reasons.
Mm-hmm.
He obviously ended up staying there and building a life and a career for him and for himself in Korea. But that we always had this maybe rose-colored glasses that one day everyone would see Asia content as something you can equivocate with global content, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that even now that when you talk to people, people still want to put Asia content or Asian American content in the corner, like it's like the
Oh, totally.
specialty content. But we think it's the same as anything else if you're just willing
Mm-hmm.
to look at it that way or give it the opportunity or the platform to do it, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so it's exciting to be at a company that at its core feels that way.
Mm. And so it's a very small company, right? Like, how many employees do you guys have across
Small and
Korea
growing,
and LA?
small but growing quickly. I
Okay.
feel like, if there are bilingual people who are looking to do Korean content, please message me. Big plus
I
if
might
you
have
speak
someone for
Korean.
you. There's a UPenn kid. He's like a junior or senior. He just wanted to find like a summer internship, and he's half Korean, half Hong Kong. And
Okay,
I think he speaks both, like Cantonese and Korean. But
send him.
after this, I will connect you to. He just
Send
reached
him.
out to me, and I'll send you his social because he writes. He's like a junior or senior, so whatever that is, 20, right? But he has this whole portfolio of like amazing animation because he's a dual CS and creative writing studies
Great.
um, like guy. And so I was like, yeah, there's stuff like that. Okay, so but my question and what I want to unravel there is that there's so much of what you guys are doing that I think it's on the whether we want to admit it or not, like what you guys are trying to do at Bound, what like I've been trying to do, what we are trying to do collectively, I think is so on the fringe. People are not really thinking like what you said about how Asia content from Asia should just be mainstream. Like most of Hollywood does not see that. Like, and I don't even know if, like, for example, in my experience working with Chinese companies, they have that ambition, but I don't think they necessarily care if that happens.
Well, I don't think it's that they don't care that it happens. It's just that they know that if they come to Hollywood, there's at least a little bit of kowtowing and kneeling involved, and they don't really feel like they have to do that,
Right,
right?
and that's a different way to say it. Yeah. Like,
Yeah.
like, but if they really felt like strongly about it, in my view, like they would try, right? Like make the effort, right? Because you have folks that like on the individual level, like when I started in the industry in the early 2000s, that's what individually like Jackie Chan, Chung Fat, like Jet Li all try to do. And they kind of all decided that what they tried, they gave it their shot, and the system just wasn't ready for it. And so you see most of them kind of went back.
Yeah, I would say that for them, they probably just saw the proportionate benefit of, all of what they had to do to get the kind of respect. Whereas everybody considers Jackie Chan to be their uncle in China, right? And no one in Hollywood is going to have that same sort of respect and reaction to him. So, and I also think everybody, when you reach a certain age or a certain point in your career, is looking for recognition, right? So when you're younger, you're maybe more adventurous or want to experiment more, but at some point you just want to be recognized for the hard work that you've put in, right?
Yeah. And so what are the things that you guys are doing as a company to kind of achieve that goal of having the content be more recognized as, mainstream, and in terms of like the caliber of the content be just as good as anything that's being produced in the rest of the world? Are there certain deliberate things that you guys are doing with whether it's development or story selection or the talent that you work with? Like, how do you guys execute on that vision?
All of the above. And we have those types of conversations all the time, right? Is how we can get Hollywood and Asia to collaborate in a meaningful way. How we can bring certain Hollywood stories or certain Hollywood types of discipline to Asia so that the type of product or milestones that they reach is something recognizable by the Hollywood machine, right? And then just trying to build relationships with people and really just explain to both sides of the ocean, like, this is how things are done. What are your concerns, right? How can I help with bridging that gap? And I would just say that there's just for me, I feel like I've been doing this for the last 20 years of my life, right? But I feel like it's sort of the first time in a long time that I feel like both sides are sort of willing to listen, right? And I think in China, I think there was a period when they were really interested in listening. But then, maybe for either political reasons or because the market is big enough in China that the interest in making those connections sort of waned.
It's complex.
Yeah. I mean, that in and of itself can be like hours and hours of conversations, and we could like pull in experts from everywhere about it. But
we'll take it to Clubhouse.
So you keep telling me. I mean, I have this iPhone.
Oh, you got it.
I have an iPhone. I just need
you got it.
I just need to find my charger, and then this is my mother's iPhone.
I will mail you a charger if you can't find it.
Okay.
I have extra chargers.
All right. Sounds good.
And so when you say Asia, though, for your company, is it more Korea, or are you guys doing a lot of different countries within Asia as well?
It's not just Korea. I get this question a lot. It's not just Korea. Obviously, we have close relationships. We're in Korea, which makes a big difference. But I have Chinese language projects. I have projects set in other places in Asia on our slate. We were actually planning to open an office in Vietnam, but for the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
So we really wanted to be an Asian company, right? But like sometimes I feel like both me and like Bound, like we're filled with people who sometimes our eyes are bigger than our stomachs.
Well,
So
there's
it's
so much
like,
to do.
yeah,
There's so much to do.
there's so much we want to do.
Yeah.
And so, but one step at a time. I mean, we're excited about everything out there.
Yeah. What are, I mean, without whether you want to go into specific project or not, what are the type of stories that I guess, I mean, maybe bring it more personally. What are the type of stories that you want to tell that you're looking for?
I personally would love to tell more coming of age YA focused stories.
Mm.
I just feel like when I was growing up, like when I was looking through the questions that you sent me,
Mm-hmm.
like
Yeah.
the movies that really affected me were like I love this movie called Candle Shoe, which was
Mm.
this really random. I think it's a Disney or Touchstone picture, and it's about like these con men who pick up an orphan and use her to con this really rich family, but only to find out maybe she really is the long lost granddaughter of this family. But in the end, it
Mm-hmm.
didn't even really matter.
Yep.
And I just felt like that's sort of the at the age when media and stories like really capture your imagination, right? And I've always wanted to do stories for that age group. Although
Mm-hmm.
I feel like in the way the world is changing in media consumption, that's actually more and more difficult as a proposition, given how important things like TikTok or YouTube has become,
Mm-hmm.
and video games and things like Minecraft has been like
Mm-hmm.
taking up their their very precious time to like look at things and watch things, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So,
Mm.
but yeah, I love anything youth oriented, and it could be like any genre, because I think that young people like everything, right?
Do you see an opportunity to bridge like some content that can reach young people like in Asia, like and the US at the same time, kind of like how K-pop is kind of grabbing their attention right now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I think the best advice or best like this animation director once told me that he felt like universal stories are best told through specificity
Mm-hmm.
is something that I've really hung on to is like if you try too hard to like make it great for everyone, you sort of water down the human experience of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when you're very, very specific, people will find their own truths in someone else's experience, right? And that's what I think is really exciting, even in terms of what we're talking about for story for young people, is I just think that we need to look under more rocks around the world for
Yep.
really great stories and still stop obsessing over trying to tell the same ones over and over again, right?
Totally. Yeah. And in that, what are then from some of the stories that you're excited about or want to develop? What are the type? Are there certain type of lead characters that you currently don't see on screen that you want to see a new perspective? What are those new perspectives that you haven't seen yet that you would like to see?
Uh, I would love to see, you know, I think like a movie like Raya is really, I could be
Mm-hmm.
mispronouncing it.
Yeah, I
Is
don't know either, but I saw it and it was great.
I it's on my list, but I just feel like more heroines that look like
Mm.
all the different spectrums of what Asian is.
Mm-hmm.
It's very
Yep.
exciting.
Yep.
I would love to see I would love to see and I think it's on the horizon, right? But it's just hasn't quite landed yet is, an Asian American hero in a big franchise movie,
Mm.
right?
Like
You know.
Shang-Chi.
Yeah, something like that. I know nothing about that
Oh
movie
yeah,
really,
it's a
but
secret. None of us do.
something like that. I mean, I feel silly saying that because I know it's in the works, but it just hasn't been on screen yet. But in terms of what hasn't been on screen, right? I'd love to see more like interracial romances on screen. I'd love to see more Asian romances, whether we're talking about queer or transgendered or non-binary. I think that there's a lot of exciting characters and stories to tell in that realm as well. I'd like to see more projects like, Minari, where the Asian American experiences, the immigrant stories, are just considered to be American stories, which I think with that movie in the mix of things it's clear that it's still hard for people as a frame of reference for those types of stories to be considered truly American.
Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's like a whole other issue as well. We could go on hours with that. I think you'll love Raya. You haven't seen it, but I won't spoil anything. But even when you look at Raya, the depiction of her father, I think it's a view that we really haven't seen that type of character before. Like whether it's live action or animation, I don't think we've seen that yet. So I'm excited to hear what your thoughts are. And I guess, how do you guys look at, or how do you view like language with all this? Like, do you think it's important that the content that you make for it to be, celebrated and mainstream be in English? Or do you think there can be opportunities for movies like Minari or, more Parasites, or maybe a Chinese film, a Vietnamese language film to become mainstream?
That's such an interesting question because I think language is something that we talk a lot about. And I think, as an Asian American living in Asia, like there's this wall, right? Like in Asia, everybody wants it to be local language. And at some level, we also know that there's an expectation that, the lingua franca of the world is English, right? Which might be changing. And then for me personally, it's like, I think the platforms have made this issue of language kind of an interesting issue because it's no longer such a big deal that something be local language, right? Because it can be dubbed, it can be subtitled in multiple languages in a matter of weeks, maybe days, but like probably more like weeks to do the whole like full localization process. And so now that you have lots of different stories on like these platforms that can reach a lot of different people, all suited to their own personal preference, right? I think for me though, and this could be, I still struggle with this of whether this is like sort of me being an American imperialist at heart because I grew up here, is I still really want to be able to tell our history as ethnic minorities or people of color in English because that's accessible for young people, or any people really. Because I think I've been sort of trained, or I grew up with this idea that like as an American, my history is European, so like I know more about history in England
Totally.
growing up than I know about, or in Europe, right? I know, all the different kings and, their struggle to capture the West, to conquer the West has always been part of not just like history lessons in school, but also what we see in the media, right? And even on a contemporary basis, right? Like if you shoot a action adventure in Europe, all the characters can be white and speak English, even if they're in France or Germany, where they probably should be speaking French or German, but they get to speak English.
Yeah.
You said the same thing in Asia, and then it's like, oh, well, it's local language and it belongs in the international departments of these places. And I just find that to be such a unfair concept, right? Like
It's almost like a double standard on both sides.
Yes, on both sides.
Like the Asians have a double standard too.
Yeah, and we have these like discussions with our home office about this, right? Is, for them, like, well, they're like, of course, if you're in Korea, you're going to speak Korean because that's more realistic, right? But I'm like, what about any movie that is based on a fictional story is realistic? There's nothing that realistic. And, and are these conversations happening about, like if you have a movie set in Europe with, like Tom Hanks or Charlize Theron, like, are they thinking about like, well, actually, it's more realistic if you spoke German. So can you take German lessons, right? Or can
or even look at what they did with Chernobyl, right? It happens in
and it's funny because
all speaking English.
Yeah, and I've actually talked to execs about this and people from different countries about this, and they're like, oh, but it would have been better if it was in local language. And I'm like, there's also this practicality issue to me. If it was in local language, it's possible that it wouldn't have gotten the attention. It's possible it wouldn't have gotten made. Right? But then at the same time, I also want to see more. I want to see a lot of like these really great actors in Asia get their due, right? But then I also just think that that's unfair that like the only stories that you could tell about Asians in English can only be played by Asian Americans who can speak English. And I was like, why are we limiting ourselves in that way? Like, and then why can't I tell my story in English? Like, am I going to be cursed to only tell you about, what happened to an empress in China that like my dad is very, very convinced that we're related to in English. I mean, in Chinese, and never be able to ever tell you about it in English. Right. So it's a problem, right? Because, I realize there's also a lot of like, being Chinese American, there's a lot of Chinese people who speak Chinese and would gladly pay money to see a Chinese version of it. And there's probably less people that are Chinese who would want to see the English language version of a lot of these things, But for me, it's like it would be competitive if everybody just felt like my personal history and my personal journey of my family in getting to this country was American. That whole legacy of it is American. If they recognize that, then we would be able to tell their stories in English.
Yeah. I mean, I ask it just, to get an opinion because I don't think there is one answer. It is so complex. And I think it's also situational dependent. It's dependent on the story. It's sometimes dependent on the company. It's sometimes dependent on the talent. It's dependent on so many different things, right? And then I just go to like what I can think of is like, I guess we just need to experiment, right? Because you can't really decide until you've seen something. Right now, there's so many versions of these type of stories that you're talking about we haven't seen yet, like on any screen. So we don't know. Like maybe it'll work, but we don't know. And like the recent thing that I got kind of excited about is, did you watch the Cinemax TV series Warrior? Did you watch like the first episode, how they did that camera trick? So we're like, at first, all the Chinese guys up there speaking to each other in Cantonese. And then there's this camera trick. And then all of a sudden it's like, that they're still speaking in Cantonese, but we are understanding them in English. And I was like, oh, that is like, I think some other movies have done that before. I want to say I recall there was a movie, like an older movie that had done that before. And then I was like, oh yeah, like that kind of stuff is like, yeah, where we can experiment and play with languages. So the ultimate goal is what you said, is like to try to get like it to the widest, to get it made and then to get it to the widest audience as possible.
No, yeah, absolutely. Yes, I think Warrior is a good example of it. Giri Haji also has moments
Mm,
when the characters talk to each other in different languages and you just assume that they understand each other,
hmm
right? And it's funny because I bring up Kirihaji a lot because I have a lot of people who tell me like, no, they were speaking English the entire time. I'm like, no, they weren't. You remember it incorrectly.
mm.
You just assumed that they spoke English all the time and you just accepted the fact.
Because it's done so well.
Yeah, like you seamlessly just fell into that. And I think it's all possible, but you see hesitancy, right? When anything is possibly mixed language or set in a place that you're uncomfortable with. It's like it's weird for it's so hard for people these days to imagine people speaking English in an Asian country. So I just think it's like this weird situation. And I think that unless you've lived there like in contemporary times, right? Like you don't realize that actually a lot of these places are very cosmopolitan and modern.
Hmm
And if they spent more time there, they would just realize it's not that crazy. you know?
Right. I mean, any major city now, right? It's basically you will. Oh, I mean, any major city in China or in Asia, right? You'll find like a group of expats or whatnot. But at the same time, like when I say like it's a double standard, it's like sometimes like what you were saying, like how in Asia, like they expect things to be in the local language because I've heard things like this is not really just to the industry folks, but I've heard things like when I first moved to China, people would be like, oh, like why would you speak another language? Why would you speak English? Like, are you not proud to speak your Mandarin? Like comments like that, right? Like you hear stuff like that from people in China or in Asia. They have these thoughts like, oh, if you're Chinese, for example, you need to speak Mandarin. Why would you speak any other language?
Yeah. Yes. 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 I do think that it I mean, it's sort of like the same mentality that like people in America think that, English only, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it's less defensible in a place like America because we're supposed to be at our core welcoming to different cultures and be welcoming to immigrants. Although depending on what period of our history you're talking about, that might not be the case. So, but in China, like, yes, yes, but I do think that there are worse things happening in certain countries in Asia that like whether you speak the language or not is like maybe them wanting you to speak the language is like not the worst thing, right?
Oh no, it's not that,
Yeah,
and I don't mean that as a critique. I just think it's like it's humorous. That's
yes,
like what you get like on both sides. We're kind of dodging bullets,
yeah, no, yes. I actually think it's hard being an Asian American in this day and age, right?
Yeah.
Because you feel very caught in the middle sometimes, right?
Oh, totally.
No.
Yeah. And how do you think then, as like being the bridge, how can we work together to you know like whether it's just as simple as that, how can we better work together? But also, how can we help each other, like kind of with this goal of like bridging these two very different places and, so many different cultures? How do we build towards a more, I guess, diverse, multicultural kind of storytelling?
Gosh, there's so many. I mean, there's so many parts to that answering that question. I think first everyone needs to check their ego at the door, right? I think that like something like a movie like Parasite can show you that it's possible to do a really specific movie in another country, really done up and down by Korean crew that can really capture the imaginations of a worldwide audience, right? That there's not one way to make a movie or make a TV show. Um, I think on the Asia side, I wish that there was more recognition that, in the same way that I think that I wish people would talk about like Chinese history or Korean history or the history of Vietnam, and all the Asian countries. Sorry if I forgot one of is that they could accept that as part of our American legacy, right? That it's not just like, what's happening in the UK or Germany that is contextually part of American history, right? Or our American legacy.
Do you mean the diaspora, like the Asian accepting that exists, not just in Asia?
Yeah, I think on both sides, it's like I get frustrated a lot because I feel like we only ever want to talk about, like, if you're talking about anything as historical, it's the only valuable historical stuff that people consider to be mainstream in the US is European history, right? But that's really just because the whole of media industry, from books to film to TV, has made it so, right? But then at the same time, I wish that in Asia they would accept that as part of their story of like Koreans in the world. Doesn't mean just because they ended up in a different country, it doesn't mean that that's not an experience, right?
Totally.
Yeah. And
it's so complex. It's becoming more complex, don't you feel?
It's still complex, but I think plus I feel like Minari and The Farewell are very good examples of this that I thought was really exciting about the choices that they made is they brought actors from both sides, but from both worlds to work together, right? And being willing to be open to that, right? That sort of being able to be willing to mix two different working environments together, right? And I think that can yield a lot of exciting results, right? And so,
for sure.
Like checking your ego at the door and being very open-minded about what could be the elements of a project, right? You don't, just because you tell a Asian American story doesn't mean that there isn't anything from Asia to offer you, right? But just because that you tell an Asian story doesn't mean that there's not things in the West that can be offered to tell an Eastern story, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's lots and lots of work to be done. So I guess on the other side of that, there's a lot of opportunities. That's why you guys are so busy.
Yeah, I hope that there are lots of opportunities and that people really want to hear different stories from different people. And hopefully we'll have a lot more we'll have a lot more opportunities to do that.
Yeah. Do you have any current or recent things that you watched, maybe even not so recently, that you recommend for people?
Oh my goodness. I don't even know. I feel like it's been such a weird mixed bag of stuff.
What have you been watching recently?
What have I been watching recently? I watched a lot of random Asian stuff.
Anything good?
I mean, of course, but like, where do you start?
Anything.
Recent stuff, I don't even know if some of the stuff I watched is recent anymore. It's just whatever is needed to be watched. Like, I think there's a Korean movie called The Witch that I think is a really interesting movie that I thought, in the way that Korean people talk about, I think is really exciting. I would say that a Korean book that really, really affected me was Kim Ji-young, 1982. And I haven't been able to watch that movie yet because it's not available on a streaming platform, but they adapted it into a Korean movie. But Kim Ji-young, 1982, basically spawned a movement in Korea, and I wish more people knew about it. But it spawned like a feminist movement where female celebrities would carry around that book as sort of in solidarity of like the Me Too movement.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And
I'll
I
check
just,
that out.
yeah. And that's a book, that a Korean book that got adapted into a movie that I'm dying to see, that really affected me. You know, I know it's slightly controversial because I've seen some differing opinions about this, but I love Promising Young Woman.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I thought that was
Fantastic.
tremendous, entertaining movie. There's some Chinese movies that I'm dying to see.
Which ones are you dying to see?
The one that was the New Year's.
Oh, Hi Mom.
Yeah. Like, I mean,
there's an abundance of like pirated copies on YouTube, but the audio is so horrible I refuse to watch it.
yeah, yeah, probably. I still think that is it, what did they call that movie in English? I can't even remember what it's in Chinese anymore. The one about bullying. I thought that was a great movie.
Oh, Better Days.
Better Days.
Tony Anthony. Yeah,
Yeah.
you saw that, right?
Yeah, I saw that when I was in China briefly.
Oh, did you watch it in the theaters?
Yeah. I mean,
wow.
It was sort of like near the end of its run, so like the theater was pretty empty, but I was just like, this is like amazing.
Yeah, you have to watch that one. I think you have to watch it in the theaters. I saw it at the Macau Film Festival. It was like my last trip before COVID started.
Mm-hmm.
And it was amazing to watch that movie in a theater.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's a very tough film to watch. So you kind of, if I watched it at home, I would probably just stop it.
Yeah. Really?
I think so. There's like, it took me like, I tried to watch Roma. It took me 4 times to watch it. Because on Roma, I just fell asleep. So, yeah.
I also think for me, watching movies has been harder during the pandemic. It's almost like
focus, or why? Why has it been harder for you?
Because the space, like you're sort of trapped in this one space
all the time,
and so just to like like I feel like before, when you're like moving and driving to places, like you almost welcome this idea of like sitting for 2 hours in one place and not having anything to do, and it's like the last thing that I want to do during the pandemic. I was just like, I'll watch something short or like something that I can do while I'm doing something else.
Yeah. I need to multitask or something. Yeah.
I can't even listen. I mean, I hate to say this because we're doing a podcast, but like,
oh no.
like I love the format of the podcast when I'm on the move, but like to sit still and do nothing.
What about, I listen to a lot of podcasts also when I'm doing stuff around the house.
Yeah, I'm not a very domestic person, so.
Or what about when you take walks, like when I'm going walking? Unless you're walking with your parents, I guess, or someone, or a friend.
No, I try to leave all of that at home when I'm walking, and then also I'm such a klutz that like, I only take my phone out to like maybe snap a photo, but like, I keep it all tucked away because I'm always afraid. And like, I like to go biking these days and I can't bike in.
Oh yeah, that's a little bit of a distraction. That would not be wise.
I can't even listen to music. It's like really terrible.
Yeah. So, well, biking here is like you're going into battle. Unless you live in like the countryside or something. It's
not so bad here in Sacramento, but I wouldn't say it's anything like biking in a big city like LA or New York. But I blame it on old age a lot. Like there's a lot of things that I could do when I was younger, like, walk and chew gum at the same time, that I can't do now that I'm older. So, yeah.
You can. It's a matter of, you have to put your mind to it. It'll get there. And I guess a couple of last questions. We talked about like when you were younger. Do you have any advice to like a 20-year-old or a recent college grad?
Intern, meet people, like ask to meet people, do a lot of informational interviews, intern at a lot of places, experiment. Like there's no one path, to anywhere, to any job, really. I feel like you make your own future, especially these days. And I think you have to be adaptable, right? And sometimes I think we put a lot of pressure for people at a certain stage in their life to make a decision about what they want to do for the rest of their life. But I
totally.
But I don't.
You're supposed to know it like out of college or something,
Yeah, and but I kind of always felt like I was a late bloomer in life. That like even now I'm starting to realize certain things about the world that I just maybe didn't pay attention to, and it's
totally.
okay. Yeah, it's okay to choose something different or to make that choice. Like, be responsible, of course, right? But it's not always necessarily laid out for you in that way, and I think you get to know more of that if you talk to a lot of different people, which I think we can all do a little bit more of. Right?
Yeah. And what is something that you do for self-care?
I've recently gotten into watercolors.
Oh, cool. Like painting.
Yeah, I guess so. For me, it's just like playing with color, right? So,
okay.
Like, how they have adult coloring books, and I don't like to color within the lines, but like, I like to go on Instagram, especially with my friends' photos of their kids, and try to replicate them in watercolor. Very often disastrous results, but for some reason, it both amuses me and like takes my mind off of like whatever I'm doing at work. So
do you show them to anyone?
Sometimes, and I think my friends are all very kind. And I can't draw faces, so I usually try to draw like photos of people's kids, like if their face is partially obscured in some way.
Right.
Yeah, because if I try to draw a person, they end up looking like a 80-year-old man. It's like that's just a default problem I have. But I think it's also because parents love to dress their kids in bright colors. And so you just have like more fun in terms of like, oh, they're wearing like a purple dress with like pink shoes and stuff. So it's like really fun to like have all the different colors on your page, Yeah. And then sometimes I try to be serious and like watch a YouTube video on how to draw something, but like that's too serious for me. So yeah, but that's what I've been doing for self-care. Other people have been like baking bread, and I've just been like trying to replicate photos on Instagram.
I think that's very cool. It's very different. I haven't heard that one yet. And I think it's, last year I did a watercoloring thing, and that's why I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. Like I would never have thought to do it.
Oh, really? What do you mean you did a watercoloring thing?
I went to an event, and they had like they had like the materials. They had like the board. They had the colors. They had the like whatever the brushes, and it was like we just we sat on a rooftop, and then we just drew like the skyline of LA. So I was like, oh, that's cool. Like I've never done anything like that. And then I was like, oh, it is really fun because I don't consider myself like having any artistic capabilities when it comes to drawing. With the watercolor, I was like, oh, it doesn't, it's like you just kind of play with colors.
Exactly.
And I wasn't doing anything as hard as like people. I was like, wow, people is like that stuff. I was just doing like the skyline. So you just like, here's a little color there, and here's a little color here.
Yeah, my mom is always asking me to do more landscape stuff, and I tried it once, and I think like you have to like do it in layers. I don't have the patience for that. Like, I feel like I have 15 minutes between the meeting, and I just need to clear my mind. So I'm just gonna like draw something, and then hopefully.
Oh wow, interesting.
Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah. And is there anything you look forward to once we get out of this? What's the first thing you're gonna
Uh,
want to do?
First thing I'm gonna do when we're out of this, probably
Yeah.
move back to LA.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
nice.
yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's been great to spend so much quality time with my parents and make them part of my bubble. It's
Yeah.
clear to me, and I actually think we lasted a lot longer. I mean, I don't live with them, but I feel like you can already start to see that like we're sick of each other because it used to be like I'd go over to their place to eat meals like a couple times a week. And then now both sides, I'm like, oh, I think I'm just gonna have dinner at home. And my mom will be like, you're good for the week, right? We don't have to see you for a while. So yeah, or like, oh, you can come by and just, you don't have to come say hello. That's how it used to be. So yeah.
Well, we will welcome you back to LA, and then we'll have to, catch up in person. That'll be nice. I'm sure a welcome change for you also to be back in LA.
Yeah. I miss having coffees and lunches with people.
Yeah.
Like I like the one-on-ones, but I feel like video call like again, I think the video call thing doesn't work for me because like you're always stuck in this one space and it
Mm-hmm.
just feels like focusing on another thing in this one space feels really unexciting.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Well,
I just
I want to walk around. Like I don't want to like being in one space while you're on a call is like annoying.
yeah, yes. And then I miss the food in LA. I honestly think LA has like the best food scene of anywhere that I've lived ever. So,
Hmm.
yeah,
Wow, interesting.
yeah,
Well, yeah, I mean, I do agree to I mean, in terms of like diversity, right? Because like, Asia has great food, but it's mostly Asian food.
yeah. That's what I'm saying. Like in
So in
terms of
LA, it's
diversity,
like you have good food from basically anywhere in the world.
yeah, yeah. I mean, look, I think sushi in Japan is like you're never gonna get sushi in Japan
No,
anywhere
I
else.
refuse to eat sushi outside of Japan.
Oh well, I can't because
So-
I crave it so badly. And it's really hard in Sacramento to crave sushi. But I just I just think LA offers the most cross section of different foods. And this is again like so being so spoiled and so privileged that like, I can have different cuisines every day of the week if I wanted to in LA, right?
Yes, yes.
And
Hopefully they all stay around. It's been so sad. Like I saw so many of the places in K-Town, especially that I've been going to for like the last 20 plus years, and a lot of them are closing forever.
yeah, that is sad. Yeah,
So
the world's not going to be the same when we come out of this for sure.
yeah,
So, yeah, but it makes us more thankful for the things we do have, I think.
definitely. Well, it was very nice to chat and catch up with you.
I know, but next time I want to hear more about what you're doing.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
I feel like you were asking all the questions and I want to hear more
Well,
about
this
it.
is for the podcast, and then next time, well, yeah, we'll definitely do something outside of this, and then also, like, my whole thing with the podcast is like, no one like it's like I want to figure out this format, but I also want to at some point make it more interactive. Like, I do think like everyone that I talk to has a very particularly unique experience that I don't think is very common out there. And I think it's like that's one of my goals is I want to like expose or get these experiences out there because they're not mainstream enough. And I think people need to see that. But then, yeah, like, so I'm experimenting with that. But yeah, I'd love to catch up with you, not on a podcast, and love to chat and see what exciting projects you're doing. And then, yeah, like I'll share, all the, I don't know. I've been mostly at home, and I've really become an excellent cook. Is what I've decided that I've put my energy towards over the past year
Oh,
on
wow.
YouTube. I've learned how to cook via YouTube.
What's the dish that you're most proud that you learned during this pandemic?
Probably. Well, so I started by doing dumplings,
Okay.
and that was pretty good because the whole trick with dumplings is that I could make a batch like on a whatever, and then it would last like weeks, right?
Mhm.
Because they would stay frozen. I was trying to survive because I didn't want to go like grocery shopping. So I would buy a bunch of like stuff and then make it and then put it in the freezer. And then I think, so I've then just started like looking up things that I love to eat. And then I just buy really good ingredients. So my favorite thing right now is my cornbread. And then I will do like my own like things with the cornbread. For example, this one time, like the favorite version I think I had of it is I put some yuzu chili peppers in it. Mm-hmm. So you could taste like a slight hint of yuzu like in the cornbread. And then I stuff it with like actual corn. And then I use like whether it's bacon or chorizo or pepperoni, like I experiment with different types of like cured meats in it. And like that is like makes it, and then I can eat it like just like that, or like with cheese, or I add a lot of cheese too, like cheddar cheese, like in it, and then I can make sandwiches with it. But yeah, like a lot of very simple foods. Like I learned how to make fried chicken, and like simple like comfort food.
That's good.
I would say.
It's amazing. That's amazing. No, it
you
really
can do
is.
it too. Now you can do it too. People say that, but I was like, it's so easy because I don't really consider myself knowing any of this. But when you look up enough YouTube videos, like it's like you just follow what they show you because it's visual. It's visual, and they tell you what to do.
Well, so this is something that I learned about myself during the pandemic is when you sit here very quietly and you realize that you have all of these things, like I kind of feel like you could choose anything to be like your hobby or something in the pandemic.
Right.
But then I realized I really hate to cook.
I mean, yeah, that's fine. And that's totally fine too. You just find whatever it is for you.
Yes, if I could have a choice, I would never have to cook anything.
And that's why, you'll come to LA and then we'll go eat out.
Sounds good, Jason.
All right. Well, have a great weekend. Thanks for doing this.
Yes.
And I'll see you soon.
All right.
Okay.
Talk soon. Bye-bye.
Bye, Jamie.